For decades, Lucille Ball was a woman who made the world laugh when it needed laughter the most. Her face was familiar in millions of homes. Her voice filled living rooms. And her humor brought families together every single week. To the public, she was bright, loud, fearless, and full of joy. She fell into vats of wine, stomped grapes, and made silly faces that became part of television history. People believed that someone who could bring that much happiness to others must live a happy life herself. But near the end of her life, the laughter slowly faded, and what remained was silence, reflection, and pain that few had ever seen. When Lucille Ball sat down for what would become her final interview, it was not the same Lucy the world remembered. The famous red hair had faded, her energy was quieter, and her words carried the weight of a long and difficult life. She was no longer performing. She was finally telling the truth to be why the late 1980s. Lucille Ball was a legend in name, but her world had grown very small. Fame had once surrounded her, but now it felt distant. The woman who had once commanded the attention of over 40 million viewers each week now spent most of her days in quiet rooms, surrounded by memories instead of people. Her Beverly Hills home, once full of guests, writers, and laughter, felt empty. Many of her closest friends were gone, and the industry she helped build had moved forward without her. Younger comedians ruled television, and while they often spoke of her influence, few ever reached out personally. Lucille felt forgotten, not as a symbol, but as a person at I end that final interview. There was no anger in her voice, but there was sadness. She spoke slowly, carefully choosing her words, as if each sentence came from a place she rarely allowed herself to visit. She talked about time, about how quickly it passes, and how strange it feels when the world no longer needs you in the way it once did. She did not complain, but her honesty was painful. She admitted that success does not protect you from loneliness, and that applause does not stay with you when the lights go out. Those listening could feel it. This was not a performance. This was a woman looking back at her life and realizing that even the greatest success comes with a cost. Lucille Ball had spent most of her life being strong. She learned early on how to hide pain behind humor, how to turn fear into laughter, and how to keep going even when everything felt like it was falling apart. In her final years, her health was failing. Years of smoking had damaged her lungs, and heart problems made everyday tasks difficult. Still, she refused to slow down. She had built her entire life on determination, and stopping felt like surrender. But in that interview, there was a softness that had not been there before. She no longer needed to prove anything. She simply wanted to be understood. What made the interview so emotional was not just what she said, but what she no longer tried to hide. She spoke about regret, about relationships that were broken, and about love that never fully healed. She spoke about feeling left behind by a world she once ruled. For the first time, the queen of comedy allowed herself to be seen not as a star, but as a human being. And in that moment, those watching realized something powerful. The woman who gave the world laughter had carried her own sadness quietly for decades. That truth, finally spoken aloud, was what left everyone in tears. Tio understand why Lucille Ball's final interview felt so heavy. It is important to look back at the loneliness that surrounded her in her later years. By 1989, her name was still spoken with respect, but her daily life no longer reflected the fame she once knew. The entertainment world moves quickly, and Lucille had learned the hard way that even legends can be left behind. The phone did not ring as often. Invitations stopped coming. The same industry that once depended on her now focused its attention elsewhere. Lucille Ball, the woman who helped create modern television, spent many evenings alone, sitting quietly in her living room, watching reruns of I Love Lucy. Sometimes she would laugh at her own work, surprised by her timing even after all those years. Other times, she would wipe away tears, not because the scenes were sad, but because they reminded her of a life that no longer existed. Her children, Lucie Arnaz and Desi Arnaz Jr., loved their mother deeply, but they had their own lives, their own struggles, and their own distance. They lived far away and visited when they could, but the closeness Lucille longed for was not always there. Her second husband, Gary Morton, remained loyal and caring, offering stability and comfort. Yet even with him by her side, there was a sadness that seemed to fill the house. Gary later spoke about the quiet pain Lucille carried, a feeling that could not be cured by money, awards, or fame. She had achieved everything a performer could dream of, yet she felt emotionally unfinished. Part of that pain came from her attempt to return to television in the mid-1980s. After years away from the spotlight, Lucille decided to come out of retirement with a new show called Life with Lucy. She hoped it would remind the world of who she was and prove that she still had the magic that once made her unstoppable. But the television landscape had changed. Audiences had changed. The humor that once felt fresh now felt old-fashioned to some viewers. After only 8 episodes, the show was canceled. Critics were harsh, calling it a sad ending to a brilliant career. Lucille took the failure deeply to heart. Friends said she stayed awake at night, rereading reviews, questioning herself, and wondering if the world had truly moved on without her. This rejection hurt more than any other in her life, because it came at a time when she needed reassurance the most. She had spent decades fighting to be taken seriously, breaking barriers for women in comedy, and proving she belonged at the top. Now, for the first time, it felt like her work no longer mattered. The applause she once depended on was gone, replaced by silence. This emotional wound followed her into her final interview. When she spoke about fame, there was no bitterness, only honesty. She admitted that being loved by millions does not mean you'll feel loved when the cameras stop rolling. Physically, Lucille was also declining. Years of hard work, stress, and smoking had taken their toll. She suffered from breathing problems and heart issues that made even simple movements exhausting. Doctors and nurses urged her to slow down, but she resisted. "I don't know how to stop," she once said. That stubborn determination had built her career, but now it left her trapped in a body that could no longer keep up with her will. In her final interview, her voice was softer, sometimes shaky, but her mind was clear. She understood that her time was limited, and she spoke with a calm awareness of someone who had lived fully, even if imperfectly. The sadness people felt watching that interview did not come from pity. It came from recognition. Viewers saw themselves in her honesty. They saw a woman who gave everything to her work and wondered, quietly, if it had been worth the personal cost. Lucille Ball was no longer asking to be admired. She was simply sharing her truth. And in doing so, she reminded the world that even the brightest stars can feel alone when the lights go out. Long before Lucille Ball became a household name, her life was shaped by loss, fear, and emotional instability that followed her into adulthood. She was born Lucille Desiree Ball on August 6, 1911, in the small town of Jamestown, New York. At first glance, her childhood might seem ordinary, but was marked early by tragedy that changed her forever. When Lucille was just 3 years old, her father, Henry Ball, fell seriously ill with typhoid fever. Despite his weakening condition, he continued working as a telephone lineman, climbing poles in freezing weather to support his family. His health deteriorated quickly, and on February 28, 1915, he died at only 27 years old. For young Lucille, the loss was confusing and terrifying, and the memory stayed with her for the rest of her life. She later described fragments of that day that never left her mind. Her mother crying uncontrollably, a picture frame crashing to the floor, and a bird trapped inside the house, flying wildly in panic. That image of the bird became a lifelong symbol of fear for Lucille. From that moment on, she developed an intense fear of birds, real or even imagined. As an adult, she would refuse hotel rooms with bird decorations and panic at the sight of bird-shaped patterns. To outsiders, it seemed strange or superstitious, but to Lucille, it was grief frozen in time, a reminder of the day her sense of safety disappeared. After her father's death, Lucille's mother, Desiree, was overwhelmed and struggling to survive. Pregnant with Lucille's younger brother, Fred, she made the painful decision to send Lucille to live with relatives while she tried to rebuild their lives. Lucille grew up feeling unwanted and displaced, as though she did not truly belong anywhere. When her mother remarried a man named Ed Peterson, life did not become easier. His parents were strict and emotionally distant, believing children should be disciplined rather than comforted. Mirrors were banned from the house to prevent vanity, and affection was rare. Lucille later said these years taught her how to perform, how to smile when she felt empty, and how to hide pain behind a carefully controlled expression. Another traumatic event occurred when Lucille was 12 years old, further deepening her sense of insecurity. Her stepfather had set up a target practice area in the backyard, believing it to be safe. One tragic accident changed everything. A young neighbor boy was accidentally shot and left permanently paralyzed. The boy's family sued, and the Ball family lost nearly everything they owned, including their home, furniture, and financial security. Lucille watched her family fall apart under the weight of guilt and shame. Her grandfather, crushed by responsibility for the incident, stopped working altogether. Years later, Lucille reflected on that period by saying that a single accident had destroyed their lives. The message she absorbed was clear. Stability could vanish at any moment. These early experiences shaped Lucille Ball in powerful ways. They gave her a deep fear of abandonment, a strong desire for control, and an unbreakable work ethic. She learned early that laughter could be a shield, and that success was the only reliable protection against chaos. Yet, no matter how famous she became, the emotional scars of her childhood remained. In her final interview, when she spoke quietly about fear and loss, those who truly listened could hear echoes of the little girl who had learned too soon that life could change without warning. Her story was not just one of fame, but survival, built on a foundation of early heartbreak that never fully healed. As Lucille Ball grew older, the fear and insecurity from her childhood did not disappear. Instead, they became fuel that pushed her forward with relentless determination. She knew from an early age that she wanted more from life than instability and silence. Acting became her escape, a place where she could control the story, even if she could not control her emotions. In her late teens, Lucille moved to New York City with dreams of becoming a performer. She enrolled at the John Murray Anderson School for the Dramatic Arts, hoping to learn the skills she believed she lacked. Instead, she faced one of the most painful rejections of her life. Her instructors told her she had no talent and suggested she return home. One teacher even advised her mother not to waste money on her lessons. The humiliation was crushing. Lucille later admitted that the only thing she learned at that school was how to be frightened. Many people would have quit after such a harsh rejection, but Lucille did the opposite. She took modeling jobs to survive, appearing in catalogs and magazines while searching for acting work. In 1928, she moved to Hollywood, believing that persistence might succeed where talent had not yet been recognized. The early years were difficult and discouraging. She appeared in dozens of low-budget films, often playing forgettable roles as chorus girls or supporting characters. Studio executives did not know what to do with her. She was too loud, too awkward, too physical for traditional leading roles. For a long time, success seemed just out of reach. Despite the lack of recognition, Lucille treated every set as a classroom. She studied camera angles, timing, and physical movement. She watched how directors worked and how audiences reacted. Slowly, without realizing it, she was building the skills that would later make her famous. The camera loved her expressions, even when the industry did not. She learned how to use her body for comedy, how to exaggerate emotion without losing sincerity. These years taught her patience and resilience, lessons she would rely on for the rest of her career. In 1940, Lucille's life changed in a way she never expected. While filming Too Many Girls, she met a young Cuban musician named Desi Arnaz. He was confident, charming, and unpredictable. Everything Lucille was not. Their connection was immediate. They danced together during breaks, laughed easily, and fell in love quickly. Within months, they eloped, despite warnings from friends who believed the relationship would not last. In many ways, those friends were right. Desi's lifestyle was chaotic. He drank heavily, stayed out late, and struggled with fidelity. For Lucille, who longed for emotional security, the relationship brought both passion and pain. Yet Lucille believed deeply in the power of partnership. She hoped that working together might stabilize their marriage and bring them closer. That belief led directly to the creation of I Love Lucy. When CBS offered to adapt her radio show, My Favorite Husband, into a television series in 1951, Lucille made one demand that nearly ended the deal. She insisted that Desi play her husband on screen. Network executives feared audiences would reject an interracial couple. Lucille refused compromise. To prove their chemistry, she and Desi toured the country with a live comedy act. Audiences loved them. CBS finally agreed, and I Love Lucy was born. The show became an instant phenomenon. Every Monday night, families gathered around their televisions to watch Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. Lucille's willingness to look foolish, to fall, to fail, and to exaggerate human weakness made her relatable and unforgettable. She had finally achieved the success she had chased for decades. But even as the world laughed, the emotional cracks in her personal life continued to grow, setting the stage for heartbreak that fame could not prevent. At the height of its success, I Love Lucy was more than just a television show. It was a cultural event that reshaped entertainment forever. At its peak, the show drew an audience of over 40 million viewers, a number so large that it often surpassed presidential addresses. Lucille Ball became the most recognizable woman on television, admired for her fearless physical comedy, sharp timing, and willingness to embarrass herself for a laugh. She was not trying to look glamorous or perfect. Instead, she embraced failure as comedy, showing audiences that it was okay to be messy, loud, and human. This approach changed how women were seen on screen and opened doors for future generations of female comedians. Behind the scenes, however, the reality of Lucille's life was far less joyful. While she and Desi Arnaz played the perfect couple on television, their real marriage was falling apart. Desi's heavy drinking and frequent infidelity created constant tension. Lucille lived with a painful contradiction. The man she loved deeply was also the source of her greatest emotional suffering. She believed for a long time that love, loyalty, and shared success could fix what was broken. Instead, fame only magnified the problems they already had. When the cameras stopped rolling, Lucille often found herself alone, crying quietly while the world believed she was living a dream. The pressure to maintain perfection took a heavy toll on her mental health. She was not only the star of the show, but also deeply involved in its production. Lucille demanded excellence from herself and everyone around her. She worried constantly about ratings, sponsors, and public perception. Even small mistakes felt like personal failures. The fear of losing everything she had worked for kept her in a state of constant anxiety. While audiences saw confidence, those closest to her saw exhaustion. In the early 1950s, that pressure intensified when Lucille became the target of a public scandal during the Red Scare. At a time when America was consumed by fear of communism, a rumor surfaced that Lucille Ball had once been associated with the Communist Party. The accusation spread quickly through newspapers and radio broadcasts. Headlines screamed her name in red ink, turning America's sweetheart into a national suspect overnight. The truth was far less dramatic. Nearly 2 decades earlier, Lucille had registered to vote as a communist only to please her grandfather, who held strong political beliefs. She never attended meetings and never considered herself political. But in that climate of fear, facts mattered less than suspicion. Lucille chose to confront the scandal directly. She voluntarily appeared before investigators, calmly explaining her past and firmly denying any involvement in subversive activities. The stress was enormous. Sponsors worried. Network executives panicked. Millions of dollars and countless jobs hung in the balance. Public opinion waited for her downfall. In a bold move, Desi Arnaz addressed the issue publicly before a live studio audience, joking that the only thing red about Lucy was her hair. He also announced that authorities had cleared her of all suspicion. The audience erupted in applause, and her career survived. Although Lucille emerged from the scandal professionally intact, the emotional damage lingered. She had been humiliated, frightened, and forced to defend her loyalty to her own country. The incident reinforced her fear that success could vanish at any moment. The woman who had built an empire on laughter learned once again that fame offered no protection from public judgment. These experiences hardened her, preparing her for future losses, but also deepened the loneliness that would surface decades later in her final interview. After I Love Lucy ended in 1957, Lucille Ball stood at the very top of the television world, yet her personal life was quietly unraveling. Professionally, she had achieved something no woman before her had done. Alongside Desi Arnaz, she co-owned Desilu Productions, the studio responsible for groundbreaking shows like Star Trek and Mission. Impossible. Lucille was no longer just a performer. She was an executive, a decision-maker, and the most powerful woman in television. From the outside, it looked like total victory. But behind closed doors, the marriage that once fueled their success could no longer survive the weight of resentment, betrayal, and exhaustion. Lucille and Desi's arguments became frequent and intense. Years of infidelity, alcohol abuse, and emotional distance had created wounds that refused to heal. Lucille later admitted that they were no longer fighting for love, but simply trying to survive each day. The woman who had once believed that working together could save their relationship finally accepted a painful truth. Love alone was not enough. On March 3rd, 1960, just one day after Desi's birthday and shortly after filming their final episode together, Lucille filed for divorce. 2 months later, their 20-year marriage officially ended. The news shocked fans around the world. To the public, Lucy and Ricky were inseparable. To Lucille, the separation felt like both a failure and a release. Despite the divorce, Lucille never stopped caring for Desi. Their bond was deeper than marriage papers. They shared children, history, and a creative partnership that had changed television forever. When Lucille bought out Desi's shares of Desilu for $2.5 million, she became the first woman to run a major Hollywood studio. It was a historic achievement, but it came with isolation. Power did not bring peace. Running a studio meant long hours, constant pressure, and difficult decisions. Lucille threw herself into work. Partly to avoid facing her personal pain that in 1961, she married comedian Gary Morton, a kind and supportive man who offered stability rather than chaos. Gary loved Lucille deeply and stood by her through health struggles and emotional lows. Their marriage lasted until her death, but Lucille herself admitted that it was different for what she had shared with Desi. Gary gave her calm and safety, but Desi had given her passion and fire. That unresolved emotional connection followed her quietly through the rest of her life, resurfacing in moments of reflection and regret. As the years passed, new challenges emerged within her family. Her daughter, Lucille Arnaz, pursued a career in entertainment, while her son, Desi Arnaz Jr., struggled with addiction and negative press. In the 1970s, his highly publicized relationship with actress Patty Duke became a media spectacle. When Duke became pregnant, rumors exploded, falsely claiming Desi Jr. was a father. Although later proven untrue, the damage to the family's reputation deeply upset Lucille. She had spent her entire life protecting her image and legacy, and now she felt powerless to stop the public from judging her children. During this period, Lucille grew more withdrawn. She continued working, appearing in television specials and maintaining her public persona, but privately she became more guarded. One of the few people who truly understood her was Vivian Vance, her longtime co-star and close friend. Their bond extended far beyond the screen. When Vivian was diagnosed with cancer, Lucille stayed in close contact, offering comfort and support until the end. When Vivian passed away in 1979, Lucille was devastated. She later told Carol Burnett that part of her had died with her friend. The loss reinforced a painful pattern in her life. One by one, the people who mattered most were disappearing. All of these experiences shaped the woman viewers saw decades later in her final interview. She was no longer chasing applause or approval. She had lived through love, loss, power, and regret. The confidence remained, but it was softer now, tempered by understanding. Lucille Ball had given everything to her career, and in return, it had given her both greatness and deep personal sacrifice. That truth lingered quietly behind her words, making her final reflections impossible to forget. The deepest emotional turning point in Lucille Ball's later life came in November 1986, when she received news that stirred feelings she had never truly put to rest. Desi Arnaz, her former husband, creative partner, and the great love of her life, was dying of lung cancer. Even though they had been divorced for more than 25 years, the bond between them had never completely disappeared. Time, distance, and new marriages had changed their relationship, but affection and understanding remained. When Lucille heard how serious his condition was, she did not hesitate. She began calling him regularly, sending letters, and offering comfort in the only way she knew how, by being present. Lucille traveled to see Desi in his final days, and those who witnessed their reunion later described it as quiet, tender, and deeply emotional. There were no arguments left, no old fights to reopen. Instead, There was forgiveness, shared memories, and the kind of love that only exists between two people who built something meaningful together. Their daughter, Lucille Arnaz, later recalled that her parents laughed softly during those visits, revisiting old jokes and familiar moments. For Lucille, these final conversations brought both peace and pain. She was facing not only Desi's mortality, but the end of a chapter that had defined much of her life. On November 30th, 1986, which happened to be their wedding anniversary, Lucille made one final phone call. Desi was weak, but still alert. Lucille struggled to find the right words. After a lifetime of performing, there was nothing left to act. All she could say was the simplest truth. "I love you." She repeated it again and again, her voice breaking. Desi responded softly, telling her he loved her too and wishing her good luck with her show. 2 days later, on December 2nd, 1986, Desi Arnaz passed away at the age of 69. When Lucille received the news, those close to her said it felt as though something inside her finally collapsed. The man who had shaped her life, for better and worse, was gone. Only days after Desi's death, Lucille faced another emotional challenge. She had been scheduled to attend the Kennedy Center Honors in Washington, D.C., where she was to be recognized for her extraordinary contributions to American culture. Overwhelmed with grief, she initially planned to cancel her appearance. Her family gently encouraged her to go, believing the moment might bring her some comfort. During the ceremony, actor Robert Stack walked onto the stage holding a letter written by Desi shortly before his death. As he began to read, the room fell silent to end the letter. Desi spoke openly about Lucille's greatness. He insisted that she deserved nearly all the credit for the success of I Love Lucy, praising her talent, discipline, and courage. As his words echoed to the hall, the camera found Lucille in the audience. Tears streamed down her face. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry publicly. The applause that followed was long and emotional. But for Lucille, it was not about recognition. It was about hearing love and validation from the one person whose approval had always mattered most. This moment deeply affected her. Friends said she was never quite the same afterward. Desi's death reopened wounds she had spent decades trying to manage. It reminded her of what had been lost and what could never be recovered. When Lucille later spoke in her final interview, there was a noticeable change in her tone. She no longer spoke about success with pride, but with reflection. She understood that achievements fade, but love leaves a permanent mark. Desi's passing marked the true beginning of her emotional goodbye, not just to him, but to the life she once knew. In the final years of her life, Lucille Ball seemed to understand that time was no longer something she could ignore or outrun. After Desi Arnaz's death, she became more reflective and quieter in public. When she agreed to what would become her final interview, those close to her noticed a clear change. This was not the sharp, energetic Lucille who once dominated television studios. This was a woman looking back on nearly 8 decades of living, loving, failing, and surviving. Her voice was calm, sometimes fragile, but her words were honest in a way they had never been before. She did not speak to entertain. She spoke to tell the truth. During the interview, Lucille talked about success with a kind of distance, as if it belonged to another version of herself. She acknowledged how proud she was of her work, but she also admitted that fame had limits. It could bring applause, money, and admiration, but it could not protect her from heartbreak or loneliness. She spoke about the strange feeling of being everywhere on television, yet alone in real life. She explained that laughter, while powerful, was often a mask she wore to hide fear and sadness. For many watching, this honesty was shocking. They had grown up believing Lucille Ball was happiness itself. Hearing her speak about doubt and regret felt deeply personal. One of the most emotional parts of the interview came when she reflected on love. She spoke carefully about Desi Arnaz, not with anger, but with tenderness. There was no blame left in her words, only acceptance. She admitted that loving him had been both the greatest joy and the greatest pain of her life. She did not romanticize their struggles, nor did she deny the damage they caused each other. Instead, she spoke with the wisdom of someone who finally understood that love can be real even when it fails. This moment resonated strongly with viewers. It was clear that Desi's death had changed something inside her, allowing her to finally speak openly about feelings she had long kept hidden. Lucille also spoke about aging, a topic she had avoided for much of her career. She admitted that it was difficult to feel invisible after spending so many years at the center of attention. She talked about how the industry treats older women differently, how roles disappear, and how silence replaces applause. But she did not sound bitter. Instead, she sounded thoughtful. She said that aging teaches humility and forces you to find value beyond performance. For a woman whose identity had been built around making others laugh, this was a powerful realization. Not long after the interview, Lucille Ball's health declined rapidly. In April 1989, she was hospitalized with severe chest pains and underwent heart surgery. Although doctors were hopeful at first, complications followed. On April 26, 1989, Lucille Ball passed away at the age of 77. The news spread quickly, and the world reacted with an outpouring of grief. Television networks interrupted programming. Tributes poured in from comedians, actors, and fans who had grown up watching her. Many said the same thing. She had made them laugh during their hardest moments. Lucille Ball's legacy is far greater than her awards or ratings. She changed television forever, not just by being funny, but by being brave. She took risks when women were expected to be silent. She demanded control when she was told to obey. She showed the world that comedy could come from honesty, vulnerability, and imperfection. Her final interview revealed what her work had always hinted at. Behind the laughter was a woman who felt deeply, who loved fiercely, and who endured quietly to in the end. What left everyone in tears was not sadness alone. It was respect. Lucille Ball did not pretend her life was perfect. She allowed the world to see her truth, and in doing so, she gave one final gift. She reminded us that even the strongest people carry hidden pain, and that there is courage in speaking honestly at the end. Long after the laughter fades, that honesty remains her most powerful legacy.